A sure sign of an impending season is when you start to get things like coaches talking about anonymously what they expect from other teams. I feel like this is the earliest that we've kind of gotten this type of content, but we do have it. We've Athlon Sports put out anonymous quotes about Michigan football from other Big Ten coaches. We're going to talk a bit about that as well as recruiting on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday and happy post-Memorial Day. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports and Media Group. So, excuse me, Athlon Sports got 4 quotes from anonymous Big Ten coaches. Don't know if they're head coaches, if they're just assistant coaches. I mean, we might be talking to the special teams coach. Could be talking to an analyst. But I didn't think these were too far off. It's like you hear all of the screeching from the rival fans about cheating and how Michigan's going to take a huge, huge step back, and that it's going to be like, oh, now that you don't have Connor Stalions, just kind of never minding the fact that they didn't have Connor Stalions for more than half of the year last year. In the first half, they didn't even need Connor Stalions. We've talked about that and which teams huddled and stuff like that. But nonetheless, these coaches don't have the same mentality because they're ball knowers, right? So they had some different things that they had to say about Michigan coming up in 2024. So let's start off with quote number 1 of 4. The trick for Sherrone Moore is to keep the momentum of a national championship culture through all of the roster turnover. I think you'll see a lot of familiar Jim Harbaugh practices and ideas this first season because they've got to rebuild before they can put a new signature on the program. I only half-heartedly agree with that. Now, I agree with the culture thing, but that's why they kept Sherrone Moore, right? He was a big part of the culture change. It was when he was promoted to offensive line coach, and Michigan suddenly becomes an offensive line-centric team. Now, the offensive line had improved under Ed Warner, but it wasn't an offensive line-centric team the way it became in 2021. The culture and all of that's something that Michigan had sorely been missing. We talked about that each of the last 2 weeks. Clearly, though, that's the intent, is that they're going to keep the culture running. But what I don't agree with is that he says you're going to see, you are going to see a lot of familiar Jim Harbaugh things, but I think you'll see things that are breaking the mold out of necessity. Maybe there are things that we don't think are Jim Harbaugh things that we just haven't seen because they never deployed them. But nonetheless, Sherrone Moore is his own man. He's kind of talked about that, and he's been around the program for long enough that he certainly could look around and say, like, well, I've got some ideas. Maybe he didn't feel as comfortable implementing those ideas under Jim, even though he had the kind of free reign with the offense. But maybe he was like, I don't know about that. But now he might just be like, you know what? I do this differently. And that's the beauty of when you're a protege. I don't think that I don't think there's going to be a full breaking of the mold of any sort, right? Just like there really wasn't from Bo Schembechler to Gary Moeller to Lloyd Carr, right? That's all kind of the Bo Schembechler era of Michigan. I would expect that Sherrone Moore will kind of keep that intact, the Jim Harbaugh era of Michigan in continuation to some degree. But I don't necessarily think that you aren't going to see, that you're just going to see an absolute facsimile of the Jim Harbaugh of it all. Because I do think that Sherrone wants to run things similarly anyway, but I think that he'll do some things that might be a little bit different. The second quote, the defense will lead the way for them. That can help bridge the rebuild on offense. Will Wink Martindale just rip it and blitz? That'll be interesting to see. I think that that's become kind of but certainly before he got hired, that became like oh no, he's just going to blitz all the time. And when we met with Wink Martindale, he's like, listen, that's situational. You go back and you look at some games. Yeah, we blitzed a lot. And then you look at other games, we didn't blitz at all. It was all dependent on what the game plan was for the specific offense we saw sitting across from us. So I do agree with the rebuild. They're going to have to figure things out offensively. That might take a little bit of time to come together. Maybe. Watch it won't. It'll just be like, holy crap. I don't think that's necessarily what it's going to be, but certainly they've heard it. They've heard us talk about it, and they might have a chip on their shoulder, and they might be like, screw it, air raid. Jim Harbaugh version of air raid. But certainly I do think the defense is going to be the more dominant component of the team. And but I don't necessarily think it's going to be a blitz heavy Wink Martindale type look per se. So half agree with that. Next quote. They're basically turning over the entire offense and they need to find some receiver talent for whoever wins that starting job at QB. 100% agree. 100% agree. That's kind of been one of the there's been two themes of the show in the last couple months. It's Ohio State and its fans are insane. and also Michigan needs wide receivers in the worst way. Now, certainly there are things that we don't talk about that can help out there, right? Michigan, the tight end position does exist, and Michigan happens to have the most widely accepted number one tight end in the country in Colston Loveland. Marlon Klein could also help bridge that, right? Like you've got 6'6" guys who can run and catch. So they maybe don't necessarily need receivers as bad as I even say. But I am still leery when you have that much inexperience. Because this hasn't, we haven't yet been through this long enough to where you can be like, okay, yeah, they lost essentially their two good receivers to the NFL. This next group's just going to step in and do it, right? Especially because you only really have like one like 6'3" guy in CJ Charleston, if memory serves. And him playing at a lower level, I'm still a little burned by the Dalen Baldwin. And that's not just because Dalen Baldwin fell short of my personal expectations when I listed him as the star receiver of 2021 in the Scott Bell yearly media poll. So I don't know if he'll necessarily do that, but they really like what they have in Samaj Morgan. He's trying to be more of a complete receiver. Tyler Morris certainly looked like he belonged against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. And Frederick Moore is a guy that we heard all about last year. And we saw him a bit in the spring game. If Kendrick Bell can really step up, if any of those other guys, if I forgot to mention Amarian Walker, who's also like 6'20", so he's tall, lanky dude. If he kind of catches on, then maybe they've got something. But it might not look. It's not going to be Ohio State, right? They also need the quarterback to work out too. So there's a lot going on there. Final quote. This is going to be a massive transition, even though they kept on the interim from last year. They'll take a step back, but maybe not as far as you think. I think that that's mostly accurate, but I don't want to say like, yeah, they will take a step back because maybe the defense is even better than it was last year. Wink Martindale running the show. He knows exactly what they were already running. He can look back at the tape and he can watch these college teams. And maybe he's like, oh, no, I know how to shut these teams just down. Like they gave up a late touchdown to Rutgers. Yeah, that ain't happening this year. I mean, they don't play Rutgers this year, so that's true. But you know what I mean? And they also have, 3 guys that are widely expected to be first-round draft picks. Heck, if you trust DraftWire, sister site to Wolverines Wire, they've got 4 defensive players in the first round because they got Derek Moore going in the first round. They got Jayshon Barham in the second. So I don't know, and they got Rod Moore in there too. So I don't know. We'll see. But I thought this was really interesting. It was informative. It certainly wasn't the tenor that I expected when I opened it. I expected to see a lot more negativity, and it's more kind of like we're kind of cautious about this, and things could go really right for Michigan if they figure out with this one simple trick. That's kind of what it feels like. All right, I want to talk recruiting, but because I've been talking to recruits lately. I think that there was a really good, really good quote that I got yesterday that is not getting enough attention, and I didn't want to publish it on Twitter. I was hoping someone else would do it for me because it's incendiary against a rival, and I don't want to do that to the recruit because I feel like that's not fair. But we'll do it here where we can talk. We can talk through it. So we're going to get to that here in just a moment. Before we do, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if any winning $5 bet. So go out there, pick a ringer. The team that you know, like, go and pick like a a guy that you know is going to make a golf cut, right? Like, you know that a guy's going to make a golf cut. You might lose money, like bet $5 to win one. Do that so you get $150 back. $150 back to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're going to be really recruiting heavy these next several days. So not only am I going to talk recruiting the next 2 segments to some degree, so this segment we're going to talk about guys I've talked to, and then we're going to get into some other things. But tomorrow we're going to do the entire show with EJ Holland from the Wolverine. Thursday night, and it will certainly be a night show. We'll be certainly talking a little recruiting because I'll be out at SMSB, but that does not mean it will be exclusively recruiting because we'll have Sherrone Moore, and then I'll stay for the Will Johnson camp and might talk to some players. So there might be a little more to that than just that. So that is the plan going forward. And then maybe a mailbag on Friday. Maybe. Try to do them every 2 weeks. So this would be the week to do it. If I say there's a mailbag on Friday, it'll be next week, Wednesday. That's how that works. All right, let's get into this quote. I talked to Kaden Strayhorn. If you don't follow recruiting and that name sounds familiar, it's because he's the son of Jason Strayhorn, who is, was a all-star defensive lineman for the Spartans. He is currently the color commentator alongside George Blaha on their radio broadcasts. So I've heard him on the radio quite a bit because a lot of times these road games, if Michigan plays earlier in the day, I'm listening. Like I think about when I was driving to my friend Steve's house in Iowa from the Nebraska game. I listened to Iowa against Michigan State on the way. So, and the only one that I could get was the Michigan State broadcast via Sirius XM. So that's what I heard. So he had a quote. Now I asked him, I was reticent to do it, and I didn't know if I was going to because I was like, it feels tacky, right? Like we all know like this narrative, Michigan State guy considering Michigan, like son of a favored son who is considering the rival, all of that. So I was like, I don't know if I want to do it, but I'm like, you know what? This is my first time talking to him, so let's just do it. So I said, like, I posited it in kind of a different way. So there's 2 parts to this quote. This is actually all one quote, but I separated it in the article, if you read the article on Wolverines Wire. So I said, like, how does the dynamic work with your dad? Right. Like I know he's cool with everything, but at the same time, like, he is a Spartan legend, and, you're just kind of expected to be that legacy who just goes to MSU. And yet you're really strongly considering Michigan. You got an official visit coming up, all of that kind of stuff. So he says, honestly, my dad supports it 100%. He's been the type of parent not make me like ever say to me like, oh, you have to go to Michigan State or you have to go to so-and-so school. That's not how he is. It's more than so that he wants me to go where I want to go so that I can create my own legacy somewhere else. So he's not more so what I think the internet perceives it as, like angry, not at all. He's actually very open to other schools other than Michigan State. So at that point in the conversation, I was planning on like, okay, well, there's the quote. So, but then he continues, and this is where things get kind of juicy in my eyes. Like, to me, this was like, oh, he went there. This is a shot over the bow. Michigan State, obviously, they're my first offer. But since this new coaching staff that they had, they've been very scared to recruit me because of certain offers that I have, like Georgia and Miami, stuff like that. They feel that they can't compete to get me. So the way that they are is like, if they feel they can't compete, then why try at all? I think it's kind of silly, but that's how it is with them. And everybody's been saying, why hasn't he scheduled his official visit there? And that's why. My jaw hit the floor on that. Now, it's not like he's saying like, I hate Michigan State, but it's pretty much like he's calling them cowardly. And could he still end up at Michigan State? Absolutely. They could actually read that quote and say like, well, then we're going to try. And then they could end up landing him. That, certainly you have an inside track when the father is a guy who still has strong ties to the program. But I mean, at this juncture, I mean, they've got to come from behind a little bit at least. He's got 3 top schools. He is going to schedule 2 more visits. He told me one of them is a Nouveau, one of those Nouveau schools that's getting a lot of attention out there. But you know, he does feel like Michigan, LSU, and Ohio State are the top 3 really at this point. Like, he didn't quite say it, but he also said like my top 3 schools. But the thing is, Michigan felt like it had the inside track with him anyway, because it's like, oh, you know, what about Ohio State? And some of the things that he said about Ohio State, it's like, well, I don't know if that's going to work out, but they can tell you that, but that's not necessarily, and you can read the quotes. They can tell you that, you know, like, oh, you know, one of the best offensive lines in the country. Well, they can tell you that, but that's not been true the last several years. Yeah, Justin Fry, he's just been absolutely phenomenal. Well, Ohio State fans probably won't even tell you that at this point, right? When Tim Drevno got hired by Ohio State, they were like, oh, Fry's on the clock. But with Ohio State, it was that. But it was more like, well, I haven't seen him since they offered me. LSU, well, I haven't seen him since they offered me. Michigan, oh, I've been there a ton, and they're just great. I feel like Michigan's got the inside track there. We'll talk more to EJ about that tomorrow, because he's been all over Kaden Strayhorn to Michigan for a while. Things change. It's recruiting, so again, like don't take what I say as gospel. It can change in a hurry. But nonetheless, so I've talked to him. I talked to a couple other guys. I talked to Taz Smith today. Sorry, Taz Williams. What Taz Smith? Where did Smith even come from? What is my brain even doing? It makes no sense what it's trying to do half the time. Taz Williams. I talked to Taz Williams. It's another one where I feel like Michigan leads. Now he says there's no leaders. He's open, but he was going to visit Ohio State this weekend. Visit got canceled because they apparently got full up. Was going to visit Alabama, opted instead to visit Penn State. So right now it's Texas A&M, Michigan, and Penn State. So really, again, this is one where if I had a crystal ball, just based off our conversations, like it's different when you hear the tone of somebody and they're just, you know, as I ask them about all of these schools, kind of a departure from how I used to do things when I covered recruits. I wouldn't necessarily do that. Now I'm like, hey, you're going into visits. I want to know everything. And the tone about Michigan is just different than what it is about the other schools. So he's another one. And he's a 4-star on some services, 3-star on others, out of Texas, but he is originally from Pittsburgh. So kind of more that Big Ten East type of guy. And he's kind of the same type of receiver Michigan's been recruiting for a while. 5'11", 185, more speedy. They told him he could be Roman Wilson. So there's that. Let's get to the other couple guys that I talked to. I'll give you my breakdown and my assessment on them. And I do want to talk about Carter Smith, who had an insane weekend. Because, yes, they played some football in Florida, spring jamboree. And, man, did he show out. Let's get to that in just a moment. Before we do, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you are looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. I'll tell you what. I speak so much better at night. It's stupid. If I try to record this show half the time in the day, this is why I'm trying to treat some of these ailments that I think have just been persisting forever, right? Like I used to do the show in the morning, every morning before I had to be on camera. And well, really before 2020. And then we started doing it like later. It used to be like, okay, well, instead of doing it at 9, we do it at noon. And then it's just kind of pushed itself back. My coherence level is just such different. It's different. It's a higher level. I just crushed the last ad. Just like, but like if I did it in the morning, I'd be like, anyhow. So that's that. Let's talk about, I got to pull it up here. Marco Jones from California. He does have a top 3. He's considering Michigan, Texas, and Texas A&M. This one I'm a little bit more up in the air about. I feel like Michigan is a good spot, but I also feel like Texas and Texas A&M are also in a good spot. He was an impressive guy for sure, but he definitely really like it's, you know, he's gotten to know Sherrone a bit. He's starting to kind of get to know Wink Martindale more. He's already gotten to know Lou Esposito a little bit, and they've been texting a lot. There's a lot of stuff there, but he really likes the coaching staff. He feels like it's very elite, and he likes the idea again, like, oh, he's gonna drop me into coverage. That's something cool. That's something different. I think that helps. But what he didn't really say was that he felt like there was like, here's the difference. When a guy's like, I want to major in business, like the last 2 I just kind of mentioned, then I'm kind of like, well, it's probably Michigan. If it's like, what's most important to you? And immediately are they like business school? That's usually a pretty good sign. It's different when a guy just kind of says, I care about education. Like generally. It's different when someone comes at you with specificity. This was not the case for Marco Jones. So I feel like I would put him on my best guest list today, which I'm working on a best guest list for writing tomorrow on Wolverines Wire. But I wouldn't necessarily have that with a strong confidence level. Okay. That's a good idea. I'll have to do like the crystal ball and have confidence levels. So that's what we're going to do as far as that. The other person I talked to is Shekai Mills-Wright. I had to look at it because with the name Shekai, I instantaneously, knowing it's a hyphenated name, want to say Hill Green. It's not that. The Ekai's. He's a 3-star running back out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, who's suddenly just kind of he's blowing up, right? And he's one of those guys, he's one of those things where, to me, the way that I would look at it is he's an under-scouted guy because he has 35 offers, every big school you can think of, Alabama, Ohio State. Michigan came earlier this month. Like it's just been like the last like 2 months have just been like, oh, wow, this guy, he's a big linebacker type running back, but he's fast. He had a quote that I thought was interesting. He says, I'm 6'2", 220. I have great speed. I can outrun pretty much every linebacker. I'm a great pass blocker. I can catch. I can actually run and catch, and I can make people miss. That's why I feel like I'm being recognized as such a top prospect because he is just absolutely blown up here. But he's visiting Miami, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Ole Miss. He's going to release the top 8 soon. So there's a lot still kind of going on with him. But to me, and he was another one that I'm trying to look here at my quotes. I think that he was another one that was like business is it. But he also wants to play early, which doesn't always kind of work, but it might, right? Michigan's got a lot of running backs, but Donovan's gone after this year, barring an absolute disaster. But I mean, it would take like an exemption or a red shirt, which you don't expect. So I feel like Michigan's a good shot for him. He would be a guy that, despite all of the attention elsewhere, like Michigan just kind of felt like it felt like, you know, because I mean, like Ohio State had already offered, some of these other schools already offered, and Michigan kind of comes in late, and instantaneously it's like, boom, visiting Michigan. So he feels like, to me, like a guy that's close to a lock. Maybe not, but it's kind of like he wants to get to campus and see if it's like it matches his preconceived notions. We've got other guys we're going to be talking to over the course of the next however. Recruiting is now part of the lexicon of the show once again, because we are getting back to pre 2020 of it all. I think it was the second show that we ever did. Maybe it was like the third. It was certainly pretty sure it was the second show we ever did. Had an exclusive with Dax Hill. Committed the very next day, or actually later, technically that day. So we're going to get back to that type of stuff. All right, so spring jamboree is a thing in Florida. From what I can glean, it's like it's kind of like a little round robin tournament. You play a half of football against a couple teams, and a team can win a championship against these other local teams. It was hosted by Bishop Faroe in Fort Myers, which happens to be the school that quarterback Carter Smith plays for. If you don't know who Carter Smith is, he is your 4-star Michigan football commit for 2025. Kind of committed it unheralded. I remember where I was, not because it was like such a momentous occasion, but because it was like, oh, Michigan got a commit from someone I've never heard of, and it's a quarterback. And then people got to see him play, and they were like, dang. Now, here's the thing about Carter Smith. If you don't know, he is a dual threat, and he went nuts between the two games, which were essentially basically playing one full game because they were halves, I believe. Don't hold me to that 100%. But he basically played two halves. He had 7 rushing touchdowns. Between him and the running back, they has a running back named Deshaun Jenkins that he plays with. Athlon Sports was there. They had like a little breakdown, and they said these two are going to be a tough duo to stop for any front 7 defensive unit, especially with the way they ran the ball on Friday. Carter Smith, a Michigan commitment, was nearly unstoppable running the ball against Columbus and Sarasota Riverview, totaling 7 rushing touchdowns in the 4 quarters of play. Jenkins, and it talks about Jenkins, whatever. Here's what John Santucci from the News Press had to say about Carter Smith, or just kind of, this was just the lead into his article on the games. He says, it was just a spring jamboree. Bishop Faroe, rising senior quarterback Carter Smith, and the Vikings offense look to be in midseason form. Smith, a Michigan commit, rushed for 7 total touchdowns, 4 against Columbus and 3 against Sarasota Riverview. Same type of thing here. Anyway, Carter Smith has a quote. It's exciting. It's definitely cool to be able to do something like that, but it's great to be out there with the guys again. It's always a blast. I couldn't ask for a better team to finish out my high school career with. Michigan, I think, got a steal, and he's not an Elite 11 quarterback, so you're going to see the Tavian St. Clairs and the Buhama Jabatas, and that just made that name up. Bryce Under was not part of the Elite 11, but every other quarterback that you've heard about, I'm pretty sure, like George McIntyre, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe he's not in it, but all those guys are going to take a part of it, and you're just going to quietly have a guy that just is a late riser and a dual threat. Like, this could be interesting. With Jaden Davis and then Carter Smith, and then wherever Michigan lands next year, certainly Brady Hart is the big target for 2026. And like everyone says, what a name. I think that Michigan might be in a really, really, really good spot for the foreseeable at the position. This year is the kind of question mark, and maybe next year a little bit, but it feels like it's a position group that's on the up and up. All right, like I said, tomorrow, EJ Holland from the Wolverine on 3. He is going to join us, and we're going to talk Michigan recruiting. And probably we'll get a little irreverent for how this show goes. Probably have a callback to our days at 24/7 Sports, because yes, EJ and I were once teammates, and we'll jump probably off from there. But thank you for watching this show, and thank you for listening. We will talk to you again soon. Peace.